day on the radio, there had been hurricane warnings. That night, in her attic bedroom, Meg Murray sat at the edge of her bed and watched the trees tossing in the frenzied lashings of the wind. She wasn't usually afraid of weather.
It's not just the weather, it's the weather on top of everything else. On top of me doing everything wrong. Like being sent to Mr. Jenkins' office today.
I don't understand how a child with parents as brilliant as yours can be such a poor student. If you don't start to pay attention and do better, you'll have to stay back next year.
Meg decided to make herself some cocoa. At least, she thought, if the roof blows off, I won't go with it. In the kitchen, a light was already on, and Meg's little brother, Charles Wallace, was sitting at the table drinking milk and eating bread and jam.
Hi, I've been waiting for you. I knew you'd be down. I put some milk on the stove.
How did Charles Wallace always know about her? He never knew, or seemed to care, what the twins Dennis or Sandy were thinking. It was his mother's mind and Meg's that he probed with frightening accuracy. Was it because people were a little afraid of him that they whispered about the Murrays' youngest child?
I don't think the baby boy's all there. Couldn't talk till he was 4.
Yet the father's a famous physicist and the mother's a bacteriologist.
And their 2 other boys seem to be nice, regular children.
But the little boy and the older sister, that unattractive girl with glasses.
Meg's father had laughed when she told him what she had overheard. It was just before he went away, and Meg remembered clearly what he had said.
Now, don't worry about Charles Wallace, Meg. There's nothing the matter with his mind. He's just different. He does things in his own time and his own way.
I don't want him to grow up dumb like me.
Oh, Meg, honey, you're not dumb. You're like Charles Wallace. Your development has to go at its own pace. It just doesn't happen to be the usual pace.
Thinking of her father brought tears to Meg's eyes. It was almost a year now since his last letter, and when her mother tried to find out anything from Washington, all they'd say was that Professor Murray was on a secret and dangerous mission and couldn't communicate with them for a while. But it was plain that no one was really sure about where he was or what he was doing, or, most importantly, when he might be back. In any case, he was gone, and it was one of the saddest things in Meg's life.
I put in extra milk. I thought Mother would like some, too.
I might like what?
Cocoa. Would you like a liverwurst and cream cheese sandwich, Mother? I'll be happy to make you one.
Here in the kitchen with Mother and Charles Wallace, things were about as cozy and comfortable as they could get. Meg was not in the least expecting what happened next. And what came through the door after Mrs. Murray opened it was, to say the least, even more unexpected. It looked more like a bundle of wet rags than a person. But it was indeed a woman. And she evidently knew Charles Wallace, and Charles Wallace knew her. Her name was Mrs. Whatsit.
My, isn't this a lovely warm place? And sandwiches, too, how nice. I just got a little blown off course when I realized I was at little Charles Wallace's house. I thought I'd just come in and rest a bit. I'll only stay just a minute.
But she stayed more than a minute, and they had cocoa and sandwiches just as if it were a regular visit. But there was one thing she said, just one little offhand remark, that made Meg suddenly realize that this was not just a regular visit. It was when she was getting ready to leave.
You really should stay over, Mrs. Whatsit. This is much too wild a night to travel in.
Oh, wild nights are my glory. No, I'll just pop on my boots and then I'll be on my way. Oh, and speaking of ways, my pet, there is such a thing as a tesseract.
Meg's mother suddenly went very white, and with one hand reached backward and clutched a chair for support. And a few minutes later, Mrs. Whatsit was out of the door and gone. The next day in school, Meg could think of almost nothing else but the strange events of the night before. And it was plain when she got home that Charles had been thinking about the same thing.
Don't sit down, Meg. We've got to go.
Go? Go where?
To see Mrs. Whatsit. I want to find out more about that tesseract thing.
The road Charles and Meg took was an old one and was not often used. It wound through a deep pine woods.
They live in that big old house near the hill. You know, the one that's been empty for so long and supposed to be haunted.
They?
Yes. It's not just Mrs. Whatsit. She has these two friends that live there, too.
Charles Wallace seemed to know a great deal. But one thing he didn't know was that they were not alone on this adventure.
Who's that?
Who?
Up there on the road.
I don't know.
Maybe we should stop.
Oh, I do know him. That's Calvin O'Keefe. He's in regional, but he's older than I am. He's on the basketball team.
Calvin O'Keefe was tall, certainly, and his wrists and ankles seemed to stick him. But there was an odd sort of brightness about how he had come to that road.
It was a compulsion, you see. They come every once in a while. Not very often.
Mrs. Whatsit wasn't in the old house, but one of her friends was. Mrs. Who, a plump woman wearing spectacles twice as thick and twice as large as Meg's. She was sewing on a sheet.
Mrs. Whatsit has been so busy lately, what with this and that. It's getting near time, Charlesy. Getting very near time. Ab honesto il deteret. That's Latin, you know. Nothing deters a good man from doing what is a very good man, Charlesy, darling. But right now, he needs our help.
Who?
Your father, of course. Now, go home, loves. The time is not yet right. Don't worry. We won't go without you. Shoo!
Mrs. Murray was delighted to have Calvin join them for dinner.
We aren't having anything but stew tonight, but it's a good thick one.
After dinner, Calvin and Meg picked their way carefully across the twins' vegetable garden, and Meg told him about her father's mysterious disappearance. Suddenly, the face of Charles Wallace popped out of the darkness.
Okay, you two, I hate to break things up, but this is it, kids. This is it.
Charles Wallace, what do you mean this is it?
We're going.
Going? Where?
I don't know exactly, but I think it's to find Father.
In an instant, there beside him, where nothing had been before, was Mrs. Who. And in another instant, scrambling over a stone wall, there was Mrs. Whatsit.
Oh, it's so difficult to manage with all this wind. I don't think I shall ever learn to get around.
Here, you've just gotten snagged on these branches.
Oh, thank you. You're so clever at these things.
Oh, well, you know, an old donkey knows more than a young colt.
Now, wait a minute. Just because you happen to be a few billion years older is no reason...
All right, girls. This is no time for bickering.
It's Mrs. Witch.
I do not think I will materialize completely. I find it very tiring and we have much to do.
Mrs. Witch hovered only as a vague, pulsing glow in the dark air.
I think if you stood here, Mrs. Who,
Yes, that's good.
and you, Mrs. Whatsit, with the children.
Yes, of course. My sheet is a little tangled.
Charles, your hand, please.
But what are we doing?
Hold tight.
But what are we... Calvin! Charles!
The words were flung back in her throat. In a great rush of air and time, Meg was suddenly utterly alone, pushed headlong into a great space empty of all light and sound. She could feel no body, for she had none. No sound could be uttered, for there were no sounds. There was only blackness, more complete than any night she had known, and an absence of anything in the world except a sense of panic. Suspended, rushing through nothingness, there was no more Meg. Then there was a tingling where her body once had been, as if it could possibly be there once again, and then a sound like her heart and a dim glow beyond her eyelids. Slowly, there seemed to be feeling once again, and a possibility of sounds being once more in her ears.
Well, that was quite a trip. I do think you could at least have warned us.
Meg? Where's Meg?
Then Meg felt something like a violent push and a shattering as though she had been thrust through a wall of glass.
Meg!
There you are.
I did the best I could, but it's difficult with so many.
That's quite all right.
They looked around. They were in a large open field, sunlit with fragrant flowers and grass. It had been autumn at home, but surely this was spring or summer.
Where are we?
Uriel, the third planet of the star Malak in the spiral nebula Messier 101.
But how could we be? Even if we traveled at the speed of light, it would take years and years.
But we don't travel at the speed of anything. We tesser, or you might say we wrinkle.
Tesser. Meg suddenly remembered that mysterious thing that Mrs. Whatsit had said in the kitchen that had so affected her mother.
Oh, and speaking of ways, my pet, by the way, there is such a thing as a tesseract.
Does a tesser have anything to do with a tesseract?
Yes. You see, instead of going from one point of space all the way to another, you just sort of bring the 2 points together. Like you would bring 2 points of a cloth together by wrinkling it, and then you just sort of pass right from one to the other. We travel in the 5th dimension.
But what about Mother? When we don't come in at bedtime, well, Mother must be frantic by now.
Now, don't worry, my pet. We took a time wrinkle as well as a space wrinkle. It's very easy if you just know how.
And what about my father? Is he all right?
For the moment, love. Yes.
Can't we go to him?
In time, dear. Yes. You must be patient.
But I'm not patient. I've never been patient.
Well, then, that is something you must definitely learn. Mrs. Whatsit?
The children turned and were just in time to see the last whirling image of Mrs. Whatsit before she became altogether transformed into a new creature that was now standing there. It was white, full of grace and strength, with great curling wings unfolding from the back of its powerful horse's body, and the torso and head of a proud and dignified man there at the head of the creature. It was so like a Greek centaur, the half-horse, half-man that Meg had read about, but also so very, very different.
You will go, please.
Mrs. Whatsit, will she...
She will take you. You must see what must be seen for yourselves.
And the man-horse creature gently knelt. In her new form, Mrs. Whatsit's voice was warm and rich.
Come now, children.
The children climbed on.
Hold fast.
With a great rush of wind through the wings and a rising thrust into the sky, the children were lifted boldly above the ground and carried with a grace and swiftness they had never known before. Far across the meadows and lowlands they sped, then meeting with the mountains, up until the air grew chill and the clouds that enveloped them stung with drops of icy dew. Abruptly they broke through the clouds. Now the air grew thinner, cold, more sharp. Still the mountain ascended before them. They struggled to breathe. Then the hooves of the creature who bore them hovered and set gently onto a smooth rock. They seemed at the top of the world. Perhaps they were. There before them, in the clear blue beauty of the sky, glowed the large silver disk of a moon, Uriel's moon, so much larger than that of the earth. Then Mrs. Whatsit had the children turn around and ask them to watch straight ahead as far as they could see. They watched, their eyes straining against the softening glow of the light. Then Meg saw it. Then Calvin did too. Charles had already been watching it intently. A great black shadow, not cast by anything, but just hovering as a broad plain of darkness stretched across the sky. It was so faint, so distant, yet so fiercely dark.
What's that?
That sort of shadow out there. What is it? I don't like it.
Keep watching, children.
And they watched. In the fading light of day, stars began appearing in other parts of the sky, brilliant darts of light. But the shadow remained unaltered in its place, and through it, no star could be seen. Just in looking at this dark thing, Meg was chilled with a greater terror than she had ever known.
Make it go away, Mrs. Whatsit. Make it go away, it's evil.
Come now, children.
And Mrs. Whatsit quietly turned and lifted them from the mountain ledge, carrying them back down to the valley floor.
We wanted you to see it with your own eyes, to know something of what it is.
It's stretched so far.
Oh, so much more than you think. This planet is a safe one. What you saw was in another nebula.
But now perhaps you should see this.
A glowing crystal turned in Mrs. Witch's hand.
Look.
Faintly in its midst, an image appeared. A bright, glowing ball in velvet space. It grew larger and larger. Meg could see there on its surface the familiar outlines of continents and oceans from her geography lessons. She stared at its hazy form.
It must be because of our atmosphere that we can't see it properly.
No, Meg. You know that it is not the atmosphere. You must be brave.
It's the thing. It's the dark thing we saw from the mountain peak.
Did it just come while we've been gone?
Tell her.
No, Meg. It hasn't just come. It's been there for a great many years.
That's what my father is fighting, isn't it?
Yes, Meg.
I hate it. I hate the dark thing.
Yes, Charles, dear. We all do.
But what is it? We know it's evil, but what is it?
You have said it. It is evil. It is the powers of darkness. Now, watch.
Again, they focused their eyes on the crystal ball. The earth, with its fearful covering of dark shadows, swam out of view. Suddenly, there was a great burst of light throughout the darkness. The light spread out, and where it touched the darkness disappeared. Then, slowly, the shining dwindled until it was all gone.
Tell us, please, exactly what happened just then.
It was a star giving up its life in battle with the thing. It won, but it lost its life in the winning.
I see. Now I understand. You were a star once, weren't you, Mrs. Whatsit? You were all stars.
We are not alone, you know. So many great men on your planet have fought it through the years. So many great artists, leaders.
Yes. People like Galileo, Beethoven, Madame Curie.
But what about Father? Is he here?
No, Meg, he is not here. This is a safe planet. We just stopped here for a rest, and to let you know what it is you are up against. Your father is on the other side of the darkness that you saw from the mountains. He is on a planet that has given in. Camasot.
It is time now, children. You must not be frightened at what is going to happen.
Without warning, Meg was swept into nothingness again. This time, the nothingness was interrupted by a feeling of clammy coldness, such as she had never felt before. Then the darkness was gone. Had it been the black thing? Had they had to travel through it to get to her father? Now they were on a hillside, a plain, grassy hillside that could have been anywhere back home. The air was like a warm autumn day, and there below them, in the distance, were the smokestacks and the rooftops of a town.
Is this Camasot's?
Yes. And now, children, you'll be on your own.
Mrs. Whatsit had resumed her old shape for the tesseract. She continued.
We will be near you. We will be watching you, but we will not be able to come to you.
To you, Meg, I leave my glasses. Little blind as a bat. But do not use them except as a last resort. Save them for the final moment of peril.
To all three of you, I give my command. Go down into the town. Go together. Do not let them separate you. Be strong.
Hand in hand, they approached the town, Calvin, Charles Wallace, and Meg. As they got close enough to see the first houses, they noticed that even they were not so different from the ones they had known. The streets were straight, and all up and down them, to the right and left, as far as they could see, the houses stood small and square and painted gray. Each one had the identical square of lawn in front and an identical number of flowers leading up to the front door. The children in front of the houses were playing, as any children might play, bouncing balls and skipping rope. But one thing was very different.
They're skipping and bouncing in rhythm. Everyone's doing it exactly the same moment.
Then the doors of the houses opened simultaneously, and out came women like a row of paper dolls. Together they clapped, and together the children stopped their playing and went into the houses. The doors shut behind them.
How can they do it? We couldn't do it that way if we tried.
I don't like this.
After several blocks, the houses gave way to apartment buildings, tall, plain, rectangular buildings with each window, each entrance, exactly like every other. And coming to them down the street was a newsboy riding something like a combination bicycle-motorcycle.
What are you kids doing out on the street? Only route boys are allowed out now. You know that.
No, we don't know it. We're strangers here. How about telling us something about this place?
You certainly must be strangers here if you don't know anything about us. Everybody knows our city has the best of all Central Intelligence Centers. Our production levels are the highest. Our machines never stop rolling. We are the most oriented city on the planet.
What are you quoting from?
The manual, of course. All Chemazats knows our record. That's why we are the capital city. And why Central Intelligence is located here. That is why it makes its home here.
Where is this Central Intelligence Center of yours?
Central Intelligence. Just keep going and you can't miss it. I must continue my route now, or I will have to account for my timing into the explainer.
Wasn't there something funny about the way he talked? As though he wasn't really doing the talking.
The huge Central Intelligence Building had only one enormous door, made of a dull, bronzy material.
Do we just knock?
There isn't any handle, or knob, or latch.
Let's try knocking anyway.
But as Charles raised his hands to knock, the door slid from the top and to each side, splitting into 3 sections. The children looked in at a great entrance hall of dull, greeny marble. Marble benches lined 3 of the walls. People were sitting there, like statues.
Excuse me, sir, but could you tell us what is the procedure around here?
Procedure for what?
Well, to see whoever is in authority.
You present your papers to the A machine. You ought to know that.
The A machine?
Yes, through that wall. Put your S papers in the B slot. Why are you asking me these stupid questions? Do you think I don't know the answers? You'd better not play any games around here, or you'll have to go through the process machine again. And I know you don't want to do that.
Do you work here?
Oh, no. I run a #1 spelling machine on the 2nd grade level. I'm only here to report that one of my letters is jamming. And until it can be properly oiled by an F-grade oiler, there is danger of jammed minds.
Strawberry jam or raspberry?
Charles?
I think I shall have to report you. I'm fond of children due to the nature of my work. But rather than run the risk of reprocessing, I must report you. I have been reprocessed once already, and if it happens again, I have to be sent to it, and I don't want to be sent to it. I am sure they won't be too hard on you, because of your youth.
The man took a card from his pocket and held it against the wall. Suddenly, the wall was no longer there, and the children went into an enormous room lined with machines. They walked down the center of the room. Before them was a platform, and on the platform was a chair. And on the chair was a man.
I have been waiting for you, my dears.
The voice was gentle and kind. But suddenly Meg realized that the man's lips had not moved, that he had not spoken to them with words, but had somehow communicated directly into their brains. The man's eyes were bright and had a reddish glow, and then Meg saw above his head a light. It glowed in the same manner as the eyes, pulsing, throbbing in steady rhythm.
No, Meg, don't look at the light. Don't look at his eyes. He'll hypnotize you.
Now, my dears, it'll do you no good to try to oppose me. You will soon realize there is no need to fight me. For why should you want to fight someone who is here only to save you pain and trouble? For you, as well as for the rest of all the happy, useful people on this planet, I, in my own strength, am willing to assume all the pain, all the responsibility, all the burdens of thought and decision.
We'll make our own decisions, thank you.
But of course, and our decisions will be one, yours and mine. Don't you see how much better, how much easier for you that is? Come, let me show you. Let us say the multiplication tables together. Once 1 is 1. Once 2 is 2. Once 3 is 3.
No.
Once 4
Mary
is
had a
4.
little
Four
lamp.
score and 7 years ago,
Once
our fathers
Everywhere
put
that
forth
Mary
on this
went,
continent
the
a
lamp
new
was sure to
nation,
go.
conceived in
She
liberty
don't need to
and
cook
dedicated
any
to the
have a life
proposition
and
that all
couldn't
men are
feed
created equal.
Yes.
If you please, the only reason we are here is because we think our father is here. Can you tell me where to find him?
Ah, your father. It is not can I, young lady, but will I?
Suddenly, Charles Wallace darted forward and hit the man as hard as he could.
Charles! Charles!
May I ask why you did that?
Because you aren't you. You're not what's talking to us. I don't feel anything coming directly from you. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but it is coming through you. It isn't you.
Try to find out who I am, then.
I have been trying.
Look into my eyes. Look deep within them. And I will tell you.
Listen, Meg, I have to find out who he really is. I'm going to hold part of myself back, but you mustn't stop me.
But he's stronger than you are.
Yes, but I have to try. For Father, Meg. And it's not only for him, you know that now. It's the black thing.
Charles focused his clear blue eyes on the red ones of the man in the chair. The pupils of his eyes grew smaller and smaller until they seemed to close entirely, until his eyes were nothing but an opaque blue. Meg felt the small hand that she was holding fall away from hers, and Charles Wallace turned to look up at her with a steady smile that was not his.
Meg, we have been all wrong. Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Which have confused us. They are the ones who are really our enemies. We have been fighting our friends and Father's friends.
Calvin, that isn't Charles. Charles is gone.
Shut up a minute, Meg. Okay, Charles. If he is our friend, let him take us to Professor Murray.
It is not possible for me to leave here. Charles Wallace will conduct you.
Come this way, please.
The wall ahead seemed to suddenly dissolve. They passed through it, entering into another corridor. Charles raised his hand. At once they could see through the wall beside them that had been solid the moment before.
Here we are.
Meg and Charles looked into a small room. In the room was a large, round, transparent column. And inside this column was a man.
Father!
He doesn't see us. He doesn't hear us.
Charles, let me into Father.
If you want to help Father,
You must do as I have done and go into it.
It's no use, Meg. It's too much for us.
But it can't be. Wait, Mrs. Who's glasses.
She found them in her pocket and quickly put them on. She stretched out her hand before her and found herself walking through the wall into the cell.
Now, wait a minute.
You're staying here, old sport.
And on into the column until at last she was where she had wanted to be for so long.
Father.
Meg. Oh, Meg, is it you?
Yes, can you see?
It's so dark.
Here, put on these.
She gave Mrs. Who's glasses to her father. Fumbling, he put them on.
Yes. Yes, now I can see. Here, Meg, hold tight as you can.
And with Meg's arms wrapped tightly around his neck, Professor Murray forced his way through the cold chill, which was the wall of the column that had contained him. And with one last effort, out through the wall into the room where Calvin and Charles were waiting.
You did very well, but I'm afraid it was only wasted effort. You must come with me now. Your actions have left me no other course than this. We must report directly to it.
How they got there, Meg could not remember. She recalled only a blur of corridors and streets and more corridors as this strange Charles Wallace led them to their destination where they now stood. Meg could not believe her eyes. But now she knew at least the answer to many puzzles, the answer to the singleness of rhythm that had been in the playing children and the people in the streets, the source of the voice that had spoken through the newsboy and the man on the bench and was now speaking through Charles. The pulse, the rhythm, was here in this vaulted room so strong that Meg could scarcely breathe against its current. And it was all coming from that single object that now stood before her eyes. A disembodied, living brain. Meg watched helplessly as the brain, only slightly larger than a human brain, pulsed and quivered as it seized and commanded. Her heart now was trying to beat to its rhythm, and her breath was fighting to do the same.
No! No!
Fight it, Meg. Fight it.
I can't fight it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
And you see, that's exactly what we have here. Complete equality. We are all exactly alike.
But no, like and equal are not the same thing at all.
Good girl, Meg.
Like and equal are two entirely different things.
In Camisards, we are all equal. In Camisards, everybody is the same as everybody else.
Meg, say the square root of 5.
The square root of 5 is 2.236.
And the square root of 7?
The square root of 7... I can't hold out.
Tesser, sir. Tesser.
Yes.
Meg felt her father's hand clamp hard around her wrist, and with a terrifying jolt, just as the red haze of the room began to seep into her veins, she was once more ripped from where she stood and was plunged into the dark nothing of the Tesseract.
Oh no, I feel...
Hush, little one. Don't try to move yet.
Oh, I feel so heavy, but so warm. I was so cold.
You're so much better now. Do you remember the name you gave me? Aunt Beast?
She brought you back to life, Meg.
Father and Calvin.
We're here, Meg. We're on a safe planet. It's called Ixchil.
And slowly it came back to Meg. The violence of the tessering, the freezing cold of the black thing as they passed through, nearly ending her life. The gentle care of this great, great beast with long waving tentacles and soft indentations for eyes, nose, and mouth. So loving and all-comforting. And she also remembered the sad thing for which there seemed no solution. That Charles was still on the dark planet, still lost to the power of it.
Father, why were you on Camisards at all?
Going to Camisards was a complete accident. I never intended to leave our own solar system. I was heading for Mars. Tessering is even more complicated than we expected. We are trying to work out a plan to rescue Charles Wallace, but if I tesser and then miss the mark again, I might wander forever from galaxy to galaxy, and that would be small help to him.
We must try to call Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Which. We've got to ask them to help now.
We are here!
You understand, Meg, why it's you who must return to Charles?
Yes, I think so. I'm the one who is closest to him. I don't understand Charles, but he understands me.
Is she strong enough to tesser again? You know what she's been through.
If Witch takes her, she can manage.
We cannot assure you of your safety or your success in this venture, or that there will be no danger. But you are not without help.
Yes, Meg. For know this, that you have something that it has not. This something is your only weapon, but you must find it for yourself.
Goodbye, Meg.
Goodbye, dear child.
Oh, Aunt Beast, I love you.
And I you, little one.
Come, Meg. Farewell.
And she was returned to the spot where the hardest challenge of her life must now be faced. She had found her way once again through the streets and squares, through the buildings and offices of Camisards, and was once more in the place where the battle must be won or lost, there in the dull, red, pulsating presence of it. The brain was on its raised platform, and there beneath crouched the figure of Charles, his eyes fixed, his face expressionless.
How nice to have you back, dear sister. We knew that Mrs. Whatsit would send you here. She is our friend, you know.
No, you're lying.
Nonsense. You must also know that you have nothing that it doesn't have.
That's a lie. You're lying about that, and you're lying about Mrs. Whatsit.
Mrs. Whatsit hates you.
No, she loves me. I know that.
And suddenly Meg also knew the thing that she had that could never be a part of it. The power that was hers that it could not withstand.
Charles, look at me. I love you, Charles Wallace. I love you.
The force in the room glowed powerfully in the boy's staring eyes.
I love you, Charles Wallace. Do you hear me? I love you. I love you.
And then a shiver ran through the boy. His face looked and strained to see her, and then he slowly rose.
Meg. Oh, Meg. Meg, I love you. I love you.
And he stumbled to her on legs that had not been his own for so long a time and threw himself into her arms. They clung together tightly. A whirl of darkness, an icy cold blast, an angry, resentful howl that seemed to tear through her, then the feel of earth beneath her, and something in her arms.
Oh, Meg, you saved me. You saved me.
Where are we?
We're in the twins' vegetable garden, and we landed in the broccoli.
And there were her father and Calvin hurrying through the darkness toward them, and there, coming across the lawn, were Mother and the twins.
Meg, it's bedtime.
There's Mother.
And then Professor Murray was running across the lawn, Mrs. Murray running toward him, and they were in each other's arms. Everyone began hugging everyone else and laughing. Suddenly, Meg stopped laughing and listened. And Charles listened too.
Oh, my darlings, I'm so sorry we don't have time to say goodbye to you properly. You see, we have to...
But they never learned what it was that Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Which had to do, for there was a gust of wind, and they were gone. And they were gone.
Power off.